I'm Susanna Streeter, and a warm welcome to the MoneyLIVE Autumn Festival, the big catch-up. Now, over the past few weeks, the MoneyLIVE Autumn Festival has delivered a collection of digital episodes of networking opportunities and in-person events in central London. We've heard from a really incredible lineup of speakers sharing insights on everything from open banking to payment innovation and CX excellence. Now, today we'll be streaming all of the highlights from the big meetup, which took place on November the 17th. Now, whether you're a member of our global audience tuning in for the first time or catching content from a stream that you couldn't catch on the day or just re-watching all of the best bits, it's really great to have you here and you're in for a treat. Before we jump into a really packed day of content, though, let's quickly recap a little bit of housekeeping. You're watching this on Grip, which is the online event platform where content and networking happen side by side. This is the final opportunity for you to connect and join your fellow festival attendees in 2021. So why not schedule a meeting? Check all attendees and see who is attending. You can show interest if you'd like to reach out to them or book a meeting to chat face to face. You can also have a look and see who's interested in you and see who wants to connect. Why not turn a connection into a meeting? And then there's your recommendations. Here you can check out the best matches for you. Grip is AI powered, so it does some of the hard work for you. Meetings, now don't forget to check who has requested a meeting with you using the notification center in the top right corner or at your personal schedule. We've also scheduled a speed networking session as well, which is happening at midday. Now, this is a really great opportunity to build new connections and join the conversation in 2022 and beyond. Now, last but certainly not least, you can also find out more about our sponsors by visiting their hubs from the homepage. And a huge thank you to all of our really wonderful sponsors who've made this event possible. That is all from me, and it really has been a delight sharing all of these insights with you over the past few weeks, and I really look forward to being at another event very soon. Goodbye. Hello, I'm Susanna Streeter, and a really warm welcome to the MoneyLIVE Autumn Festival, the big meetup. It's been great to see so many people flooding through the doors after 20 months away, all coming back in person. So I think you're in for a really great event. We have 350 attendees from the world of payments, so much to talk about. But before we get going, I have a few little bits of housekeeping that you need to be aware of. First of all, there aren't any fire alarms scheduled. However, if one does go off, please do stay in your seats, and a member of the MoneyLIVE team will come and tell you the next steps, quite urgently, I'm sure. Secondly, can you all, of course, make sure that your mobile phones are off or at least on silent, because we don't want any major interruptions to the proceedings. The other thing is, perhaps before you turn off your mobile phones completely, make sure you've downloaded the app. Because this is really key for the whole event, because through the app you can schedule meetings which take place in the networking zone, and to get into the app you should have received an email with all of the details, and if you haven't received that email, do go to the digital troubleshooting support desk, where a member of the MoneyLIVE team will be able to help you log on. Now, via the app as well, you can submit questions which we really want you to pose to our panel after the discussion a little bit later today. So submit those questions via the app, and I will do my very best to get through all of them. I'd like to say thank you to all of the sponsors who are sponsoring the event today. You can find out more about them by scanning their QR codes on the digital showcase wall, or you can go and check out their pods. And finally, a bit of a plug for the after party, the MoneyLIVE after party, which is taking place in the bar on the 3rd floor a little bit later on today, so around 6 o'clock after the last session. There will be canopies, I'm told, craft beer, wine, everything to get the party started. So after 20 months away, it's really a good chance to network with so many different people from throughout the industry. And don't forget as well to drop into the Temenos pod, because you're in with a chance of winning an Apple Watch, I am told. So there we are. Lots of incentives. Okay, on to the part that we have all been waiting for, of course. We're about to start this morning's session, which is on payments innovation in a cashless and contactless world. We're going to be really bringing the payments landscape into sharp focus, discussing everything from digital wallets and open banking systems to new payments architectures. And to kick all of this off, we have Matthew Hunt from Pay.UK, who is really going to share his vision for the future. But before he comes on stage, I would like to welcome to the stage my partner in crime for this morning's proceedings. It's Emily Baum. Emily, really great to know that you're with me today. First of all, please introduce yourself. Tell us what you do and what you're looking forward to.
Thank you. My name is Emily Baum. I'm an independent payment consultant. I specialise in helping people bring their payment products to market and really complete the vision and keep challenging and improving the customer-centric side of things in the market.
And what key questions would you like to be answered today?
I'm interested in seeing what our panellists and what our speakers are going to be opening up to about open banking and the possibilities of open banking. I'm always interested in hearing what Pay UK have to say to the market, because I think it's important. And I'm also interested in technological breakthroughs and potentially new digital currencies that are out there in the market.
And as I've said, 20 months that we've been away. Just how excited are you that you're at this event and that we're all going to be talking together about so many different innovations?
It's so nice to finally be out from behind my laptop and seeing human beings again. No, it's brilliant, and I think we can do a lot more in person sometimes than we can necessarily digitally.
Absolutely. Really pleased to be here. So thank you, Emily. Do stay there, because we are going to now invite up Matthew Hunt, who's the Chief Strategy Officer of Pay.UK. Matthew, please, welcome to the stage. And we want to find out your take on the next era of payments innovation. So take it away.
Thank you, Susanna, and thanks to all of you for coming. I'm really happy to be here speaking at the MoneyLIVE Autumn Festival. And I know Susanna and Emily have both covered it, but to actually be here at an in-person event again, it's a day I thought would never come. You know, my Zoom background is nothing to write home about. And believe me, I think we're all better off here today. So I want to thank MoneyLIVE for hosting the event, and thank all of you for coming up to watch. It's really exciting to be here in person. So as Susanna said, I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Pay.UK. I'm also the Deputy CEO. And I'm here to talk today about the next era of payments innovation and how we, as an industry, are going to respond to that. Now, we'll obviously have to get on to the impact of pandemics and lockdowns, but I'll try and wait as long as I can before I do. Even before that, there was a huge amount of external change driving the payments industry before March 2020. And just to recap what some of those are, we saw a huge amount of new entrants coming into the payments industry alongside the big banks that have been around for a while. We've seen new banks, challenger banks, fintechs, new technology providers, all coming to compete in the industry. We've seen a migration from physical instruments to more digital payments instruments. We've now seen central banks starting to get in on the act with central bank digital currencies here in the UK. The Bank of England are proposing a consultation that was launched jointly with the Bank and the Treasury last week on a potential central bank digital currency. So all these external innovations are happening, and we need to respond to that. Another one that's a bit more sobering is we also have, and I will get onto this, criminals trying to exploit the payment system, in particular the issue of authorised push payment fraud, or APP scams, as we know, and that's another thing we as an industry must respond to. So there's a lot to do, and there's a really interesting context for these changes. But I said I would have to talk about the impact of pandemics and lockdowns, and I will now, because that in itself was a further driver of change in this industry. In particular, we saw the effect of the lockdown in the early months following March 2020 dramatically accelerate some trends that were already happening. The migration of physical payments instruments like cash and checks to more digital alternatives was already a big trend. Those of you who work in banks with cash and checks would have spotted that. But quite obviously, when people could no longer get together to physically swap those instruments, that trend was dramatically accelerated. Pay.UK isn't responsible for cash, but we are responsible for checks. And we saw a 25% drop in checks very rapidly following March 2020. And whilst volumes have recovered a bit, many of those checks are lost forever. Now, I don't mean to sound sad when I talk about that, because in those cases, people have found digital ways to pay that actually suit them better. So this is a sign that there is still much more headroom for further change, further innovation, and serving end users, who of course are real people and real businesses, even better. Throughout the time of the pandemic, the growth in Pay.UK instruments has continued. In particular, the faster payment scheme that we operate continues to see 20% year-on-year growth. And we think there is further opportunity for faster payments to offer even more choice to end users in the payments industry. There's more to say, though, on the impact of the pandemic and the lockdowns, because that all required us to work in different ways. We've all celebrated, being back together in person today. It required us to work on Zoom, as we all know, which certainly I'm quite tired of, and I think by your presence here today, probably most of you are as well. But in addition to that, those early stages of the pandemic required the payments industry to work in a different way. And this is worth illustrating because it's a real sense of how we can help the broader public cause in the UK. So early in the lockdown, I think it was about the second week. My family's lockdown habits were still quite good. At that point, we were going for a walk every morning, enjoying the spring sunshine before the Zoom school day and the Zoom work day started. I can tell you that eroded quite quickly, and 18 months later, our habits weren't quite so good, stumbling around the house in our pajamas, but enough of that. And on one of those morning walks, the phone rang, and it was someone telling me that right at the top of the Treasury, it wasn't Rishi Sunak who was on the phone, I should add, wanted help from the payment system to manage the impact of the lockdowns, and they wanted help in two key areas. One was they wanted to see if they could use data from the payment system to find out the economic effects of the lockdown. And the second, they wanted to see if we could dramatically roll out very quickly our confirmation of payee tool to ensure the furlough payments were going to the right place. That was a really great example of how the whole industry pulled together to drive that. The phrase we used in those meetings was, let's not stand on ceremony and be bureaucratic about this. The country needs us to get this roll out, and the whole industry did it really quickly. We talked a lot then about the Nightingale spirit. You remember those Nightingale hospitals sprung up out of nowhere, and I think those very rapid rollouts in payments was our Nightingale moment. And I think that's a really positive achievement that we can build on as we move forward. So enough of pandemics, and let me talk now about how we are going to move forward. At Pay.UK, we power payments in two key ways. Our vision is to be the smartest way to move money, and our mission is to offer end users choice in how they make payments. And this thing about choice is going to be a really key theme in me today, because I know you've got the PSR talking later, but choice and competition quite obviously drives innovation and value. So how are we going to do this? Because of the dramatically changing environment that I've described in this talk, it's really critical that we lead the industry via market intelligence and deep insights. We need to track these external trends and be aware of what's going on so that we can be proactive and work out how to help end users before things become urgent and we have to get into that reactive mode. So this theme about markets intelligence and proactivity is a really important theme for us and is a really important way that we can support our incredibly diverse stakeholder community. I was talking with Emily just before this started. You know, in 20 years ago, disproportionately, Pay.UK, or then obviously its predecessor companies, were working with large banks only. It's dramatically different now. We're working with large banks, smaller banks, non-bank payment providers, fintechs, aggregators, and this very wide set of stakeholders have a much more diverse set of interests was the case in the past. And there are lots of different ways for us to help people. And this focus on market intelligence will help us identify how we can help ultimately benefit the UK public, the end user, via that diverse stakeholder community that we have. And of course, there's another way we can get a perspective. We are all consumers too. And I was thinking about this as I got the tube here this morning. 20 years ago, or maybe a bit more, in the 1990s, I would have probably queued up at a ticket window, if anyone remembers those, and bought a little bit of paper to stick in a barrier. 10 years ago, and this seemed like a great innovation at the time, I would have used my Oyster card. And as I was preparing these remarks, I reminded myself I actually gave a £5 deposit to Transport for London for that Oyster card, which is now sitting in a drawer. So at least one of you could be inspired by this speech to go and get your £5 back from Transport for London, assuming that your Oyster cards are sitting in a drawer like mine. Now, why are those Oyster cards sitting in drawers? Because now that's made obsolete by the fact we can just tap our smartphones or our debit cards on the tube barriers and do a Google payment or a direct card payment. So we've seen these innovations ourselves. It won't stop from here. There's much more to do. Let me talk now about some examples of what Pay.UK has done and what we will do going forward. So around the time of the start of the pandemic, we launched the Confirmation of Payee standard, which for those of you that make interbank payments, I think has now become part of the standard experience. You'll probably all remember the day 2 years ago when you made an interbank transfer to someone and you had to double and triple check that you got the sort code and the account number right. If it was a big payment, it was incredibly stressful and you phoned the other side to see if the money had got there or not. You know, we all remember that now, and I was talking about this with Treasury the other day. It's now just part of the standard experience for you to type in the name of the recipient, match it with the account number, get that little green tick, which inspires trust in the payment system, and you're reassured the money is going to the right place. The reach of confirmation of payee is very wide and getting wider still. It's a really valuable tool to increase user confidence. It is part of the battle against fraud, but only part of the battle. Very sadly, there is no silver bullet against fraud. We constantly have to innovate in the payment system to keep up with how to protect the end users as criminals try and find new ways to defraud them. And confirmation of payee is part of that offering. Another one more recently we've developed is the Request to Pay standard, which offers end users more choice and more flexibility alongside existing instruments which aren't going anywhere, like direct debit. So these innovations have happened, and we're looking to work with industry to take these to the market. But I want to talk about a really important forward-looking one, and I think the PSR may mention this later because this is in their strategy, and it's connected with the world of retail transactions. At the moment, when we make a retail transaction, whether it's online or thankfully now, once again in person, we are disproportionately likely to use a card. Even if we use something like Google Pay or Apple Pay or PayPal, it is disproportionately likely to be underpinned by a card transaction on what we call the card rails. Many end users are very happy with that, but our regulators are concerned that the UK is excessively concentrated on the card market and would benefit from more choice for end users in this area. We agree. It goes back to that theme I talked about earlier. I think it's quite uncontroversial that competition and choice obviously drives innovation and value. And if vendors want more alternative ways to drive innovation and value, to receive payments from their customers, we want to work with the industry to enable that. So if our customers, the banks, want to take the possibility for faster payments as a retail instrument alongside that to the market, we want to support them in doing this. This is a really important innovation for us going forward. To do that, though, there's a whole heap of work to do. And one of the areas where there's a lot of work to do is in consumer protection. And this is incredibly important. And this is where, amongst other things, I am going to talk about authorized push payment fraud or APP scams. These scams have a tragic impact on the victims of those frauds, who are very often vulnerable. 3 years ago, when I joined Pay.UK, I probably thought that the answer lay in education. You know, could we educate consumers better to protect themselves against these frauds? That is absolutely that's a part of the solution, but advice from our End User Advisory Council has convinced me that can't be all of the solution, because often vulnerable customers are the hardest customers to reach with education campaigns. And in order for us to offer that retail payment instrument choice I talked about earlier, this consumer protection issue has to be cracked. So we're going to respond to this in 3 key areas. The first is we are talking to the Treasury and the Payment Systems Regulator about using our rulebook to provide the enforcement regime for a compensation scheme for victims of APP fraud. That's really important. The second one, though, it can't only be about compensation, because even if a victim ultimately gets compensated, they've still undergone the distress and the heartache of the fraud in the first place. So we are working with our customers, the banks, to put more preventative tools in place to try and stop these frauds before they happen. There's going to be a lot of talk today about big data innovation. One of the benefits of big data innovation is the banks now have tools to spot these frauds literally at the point that the press send button is pressed, and we're working with the banks to enable them and help them to do that even better. And the third is to put broader consumer protection tools around faster payments. If any of you had holidays cancelled in the pandemic, which most of us did, you probably took some comfort from somehow knowing you had a degree of protection if you paid for those expensive flights via credit card. You may not know the precise legal vehicle that gave you that protection, but you knew you had it. End users expect a degree of protection from the payment system. We need to work out the right degree of protection from faster payments for certain types of purchases and the business model that underpins that. So those are our key enhancements that we're looking to collaborate with the industry to deal with the consumer protection agenda. Our delivery vehicle for all of this, or much of this, I should say, is the new payments architecture program that Susanna talked about in her introduction. The new payments architecture program is not an end in and of itself. It is the means via which we will deliver some of the innovations I've talked about today. Lower barriers to entry, richer data, enabling fintechs to come and play in the payment system. I think we'll need to make progress on consumer protection before the MPA, but it will help us underpin and support those innovations once it goes live. The NPA is also a vitally important critical national infrastructure upgrade for the UK and needs to be handled incredibly carefully and planned incredibly well from a financial stability perspective. So we'll be working really hard with the industry to make sure it's well planned alongside other major innovations like the RTGS2 program at the Bank of England and the rollout of richer data in SWIFT. So I think I'm almost timed out, so I'm going to conclude now, and then we'll hand over to the next section. But in concluding, I want to reflect very quickly on the 13 years since the Faster Payment Scheme went live in the UK in 2008. At that point, the UK was a world leader because Faster Payments was the first real-time interbank scheme in the world. Much of the rest of the world has caught up with that now, some of it only recently, and of course that is great for global citizens everywhere. But it's time for the UK to take another step forward. And at Pay.UK, we can power resilient payments to help the UK take that step forward. Payment systems are the lifeblood of the economy, an economy that now needs to recover from the impact of the pandemic and the lockdowns. And it's vital that the payment system supports that by helping the economy prepare for tomorrow. And in the world of payments, we can do our bit if we think about that tomorrow today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Thank you. Really, really fascinating topics that Matthew touched on there. I want to bring back in Emily. Emily, what key takeaway do you take from what Matthew was talking about?
I knew I was going to enjoy Matthew's presentation this morning because I knew he was going to touch on a couple of things that I know have been front of mind, but what I wasn't expecting was him to reference cards and differentiation of payment methods and the way that the UK population, Europe as a whole, does heavily rely on physical cards. We do, and he mentioned there a few examples of how payment products were used during the pandemic to help people access digital payments that might have been using checks or cash. And I don't know if it's the same for our audience, but I know my daughter received a check from her grandma and she literally held it up and said, "What is that?" So it goes to show that we have still got a lot of work to do when it comes to connecting people to be able to make payments.
Absolutely. So many opportunities ahead, though. Interesting, Matthew, talking about how payments really are the lifeblood of the economy. Is that how you see it?
Definitely. I mean, I work with an awful lot of fintechs. So again, I know that a lot of them will be watching that presentation thinking, fantastic. Finally, there will be an opportunity for an equal playing field. Fintechs are just keen on giving a better customer experience, challenging, giving people better access. So I think it sounds like they're very much aligned to the way that Pay UK is thinking as well.
Okay, Emily, thank you very much for now. Do stay with us, of course, because we have a lot more to come this morning. Next up is our Fireside chat, the first one of the day, and we're going to be exploring open banking payments. We'll be hearing from the payment system regulator and Globant, who are both experts, of course, on this topic. So stay with us. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the next session. I'm really pleased to say that I'm joined by two real payments experts in this session. First of all, we have Krishan, and also joining us on the line, we have Chris Hemsley. So really excited to talk to you both about open banking payments and just how this could have an impact on today's existing payments infrastructure. So first of all, Chris, you're here on the line. Let's check that we can hear you okay. Please introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
So yeah, good morning. I'm Chris Hemsley. I'm the Managing Director at the Payment Systems Regulator. So I'm sure many of you will know we're the regulator for things like Faster Payment System, Pay.UK, Visa, MasterCard, and also the Link Cash Machine Network. And it's great to be joining. I'm actually in Stratford, but my diary didn't allow me to be in central London, unfortunately, but it's great to be here.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. And let me introduce Vic. Vic, tell us about yourself and what you do.
Oh, hi, everyone. My name's Krishan. I'm a Managing Director. I'm the Head of Clients and Financial Services at Globant. A lot of you won't know who Globant is, but we're about 20,000 people, and we're a digital consulting firm that does everything from design all the way through to execution, and primarily for financial services clients.
So some great input that you can bring to this discussion, Vic. So Chris, first of all, let's start broad. Tell me a little bit more about what open banking payments are and just how they differ to traditional payments.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, and given the audience there and the people you've probably got in the room, I might not be the best person to give you the proper definition, but I think what I can definitely give you is my perspective of what's different and why that's important. So I think ultimately open banking allows that connection between banks, between third parties, technology providers, and allows the initiation of payments straight from your bank account. I mean, that's, in terms of payments, that's the core of it. But I think the other thing that is really interesting about open banking and lies behind some of the benefits is the open nature of the architecture. I mean, there is a bit of a clue in the name, but the fact that it isn't the kind of closed systems that we've got in other areas, in interbank and also in cards, I think opens up a series of possibilities that it can provide that really valuable spur for new products, new services, new firms coming to the market to ultimately solve real world problems. When I think about that, that's things like giving people more control over their money so that they can pay bills in a more flexible way. And it means giving people like merchants, shops, more choice about how they accept payments. So scanning QR codes at the till rather than using the more traditional methods of payment. And I think it's that open architecture that opens up the possibility for this new sort of wave of payment products that really should make a difference if we can get it right.
Yeah, so many possibilities. Well, let me bring in Vic. Vic, what's your take on P2P payments or request to pay? How is it revolutionising, would you say, the customer experience?
So I think Chris is spot on. In the last year, we've seen enormous volatility and uncertainty and chaos and a little bit of ambiguity happening in the marketplace. I think a lot of the stats say it'll take 2 to 3 years for most retail banks to go back to their pre-pandemic levels of profitability. And fundamentally, we've also seen that there's been much more demand for hyper-personalization from a services perspective. I think we've also seen banks beginning to move and shift their models, especially since the advent of PSD2 and open banking. And we've seen them move very much from product and program and solution type institutions to being product driven or trying to be product driven as they begin to compete in the marketplace. And I think that's caused issues. Institutions have been thinking about how do they drive an API first strategy. A lot of them, I think, used initially scarce resource around technology to drive API development internally, and that was to drive further optimization of their own cost basis. So a great example is, with institutions using APIs to smooth regulatory compliance, to look at data strategies and so on, but less so around open architecture and open APIs. And so they're beginning to catch up in the marketplace. And I think the other thing that's really interesting that I've begun to see, and especially around open payments, is that it is, as Chris said, it's a logical extension of open banking, and being able to give the consumer the rights around their data, and then being able to understand what products does the consumer now want, and request to pay, for example, which is hugely important. And it does give, and in the pandemic it was hugely important. I think we were talking about what do you do with a check? I think that was something that was mentioned earlier. But if you're a small or a mid-sized enterprise, actually getting visibility around cash flow, beginning to understand how you can get transparency, how you can better manage your business through request to pay, I think that's a hugely interesting use case. And we've also seen, in the UK, especially over the last year and a half, the rise of buy now, pay later. We've seen Klarna absolutely zooming through almost everything. We've seen Amazon beginning to offer deferred payments type schemes using APIs and open architecture with their banking clients and so on. So I think that's been a really, really interesting place to be. I think the challenge that we see, though, is it's a technology challenge, and I think institutions are still struggling and moving to that product owner mindset. And I think driving that level of customer experience and beginning to drive incremental change is going to be the key.
Yes, there's so much innovation taking place right now, and I want to look at how there's an interlink between real-time payments and open banking payments. Chris, what's your take on this?
Yeah, so I think we've the UK starts in quite good pace with real-time payments. Faster payments is as you all know, means that the UK has had some time that ability to make real-time payments. But I think with that, there is now the opportunity to, as we look to the renewal of that infrastructure, and I think Matthew Hunt was just talking about Pay.UK's plans and progress and their ambition actually for making sure that renewal of our interbank infrastructure really supports competition and new products. And open banking is a really important part of that. So, fundamentally, those transactions that go through open banking are then actually paid through faster payments. So we need to make sure those two systems, at a technical level, but at a rules and governance level, all support each other so that we can get those good products to market. And that's a particular focus for the PSR at the moment. So as the regulator of Pay.UK, we've been working really closely and spending a lot of time, a lot of focus on making sure that renewal is done in the right way, that it is safe, reliable, but also then provides fundamentally the capability to unlock greater use cases, including those for open banking.
Yeah, because protecting customers is key, isn't it? I mean, absolutely key. Amidst all of this innovation that we're hearing about, we heard from Matthew Hunt earlier from Pay.UK about the fraud being perpetrated on a mass scale. How do you protect the customer amid such rapid change?
So I think that's a really big challenge for everyone in payments, actually. And as you've mentioned, that some really big issues, including with APP fraud. Now, I think the shift to the open banking kind of architecture, the way that's organised, I think does hold out some possibilities that will make it harder for fraudsters. So that's good. I think then on the wider issue of consumer protection, I think there's two aspects to that. I think the first is that we need to explain to consumers what they can expect, what sorts of protections go along with these payments, and importantly, what happens when things go wrong. The second aspect actually is more for PISPs, the firms that are actually delivering these services. And I think for them, I think the really important thing is that they need to understand the risks that go along with that transaction, and then appropriately mitigate the risk to consumers that their new service is sort of creating. And what that means is that if that's done right, for transactions such as buying a coffee, pretty low risk, go through, without actually that much additional protection and checks, really quick. But when you're starting to buy things like a holiday, a flight, or even a car, the risks that go along with those sorts of transactions are appropriately managed. And I think my kind of final point on this that I think is really important is we can't go into this assuming that consumers will be able to do all of this. Payments, the subtle differences between different payment types, it's just not reasonable to expect consumers to know know all those differences and make a really informed choice. And we need to get it right, because if one firm does this really badly, and that we end up with the public seeing a large-scale kind of failure to protect consumers, the public won't really differentiate between those that were doing it well and those that were doing it badly, and it will undermine trust in the whole open banking infrastructure and the whole system. Mm-hmm. But I think that's really important, and we need to make sure that we work through how best to protect consumers, those minimum standards that we need, so that we can actually build on these successes, really realise this opportunity.
So that's the onus on the institutions. Vic, what about, though, enhancing education and communication for customers? Do you think this is still key?
Absolutely. So I think, what we've seen, and some of the clients that I've been working with, one of the challenges that they've faced is, while predominantly younger users are very digitally aware, are very digitally savvy, they are they don't have particular stickiness or loyalty to one particular provider. The older the user is, the less likely they are to flip or change. And also, I think, you know, one of the interesting things, and one of the points Chris mentioned just now around, you know, creating tiering around security. One of the great benefits of open banking and faster payments is, you know, being frictionless. We all talk about being frictionless, but actually, you know, there is a slight case for having a little bit of friction in the system, just to make sure that we are secure and that people do understand the implications of the ramifications of what they're doing. And I think, you know, as Chris said, actually thinking about how that regulation works and designing that into the product and designing that into the way of working is going to be key. But, you know, in answer to your question around consumer education, absolutely. I think we haven't seen enough. And I think, you know, as organizations and institutions are fundamentally changing the way that they're going to engage with consumers, we need to start driving that far more effectively. And I think, you know, in the same way that, you know, we started having large scale, if anyone can remember back to that time in the 80s when we started getting telephone banking, for example, there were huge advertising campaigns and lots of education around what telephone banking was, around how it was going to be secure, and so on and so forth. I think we haven't quite hit that wave of education for open banking, and I don't think we've definitely don't think we've hit it with, you know, with the rise of fintechs and trusted third parties providing payment services.
Okay, yeah, so still a lot more needs to be done in that sphere. Well, let me go back to Chris, because Chris, I want to ask you about the new payments architecture and how you think that is going to facilitate open banking payments. What role do you think it will play?
So, I mean, it is really key. I mean, ultimately, though, the payments are being settled across that that infrastructure. So we have got a real opportunity here to make sure that in that renewal that Pay.UK is leading, that we make sure that it does deliver those capabilities. Now, so what we're talking about here, well, some of it is the you know, the kind of the essential things that we've got today. So, you know, a secure system, you know, speed of payment, but we need to build on that, make sure it's got the capacity to deliver the sort of volume of transactions that we really hope that open banking will attract, and also then build on some capabilities. So we need things like the ability for merchants to understand that the payment has been made, and for that to happen really, really quickly, so that in the context of a store, that they know that they can release the goods and allow the person to walk out the goods have been paid for. Simple things like that require technology to work really, really well. And the other one that, or two things that I think are also important, is that we need the way that rules are set and that they are changed to keep pace with innovation. So as new products come along, we'll need further technological changes, further rule changes, and so we need Pay.UK and also the new open banking entity as well to be able to change and flex those rules over time. And then the final thing that I'd mention in this space is that we do need to have a think about how the kind of charging model works in interbank. So at the moment, retailers are quite clear with me that they don't think it really works for them at the moment. If you're selling everything from kind of a large sort of trolley full of shopping all the way down to a stick of chewing gum, in order to use open banking payments in that kind of credible way for consumers, it needs to work commercially across that spectrum of transactions. And at the moment, at that small transaction end, the economics don't really stack up. So we need to have a think about how we charge for the use of these systems and make sure that it's done in a way that is sufficiently flexible to open up all of these opportunities.
Absolutely. Let's look, though, for a moment, before this session closes, this part of the session anyway, at the situation outside of the UK, because we've been concentrating on the UK, but do you think, Vic, that open banking payments will become a pan-European initiative?
Yes, is probably the very short answer. I think, you know, as we've seen, you know, the kind of post-pandemic world that we're beginning to move into, you know, the economic factors are going to be the same around most of the world. You know, the way that we buy and consume services will be the same. We have additional political change with Brexit and so on and so forth, and that will actually drive the need to actually optimize how we pay and how we consume goods. And so I think it'll continue. I think the UK is actually ahead of many countries in Europe, which is actually amazing to see. Although, I've seen institutions, and we're working with institutions right now in Spain. We've started working with an institution in Vienna, and they're all beginning to embrace, the use of open APIs, the use of open banking and trusted third-party providers for everything from providing, RegTech all the way through to beginning to provide better experiences for their consumers in non-core areas to those institutions. And they themselves are beginning to think about what do they want to become in their next iteration as a financial institution. So absolutely, I think it's going to continue. It's not going to go away, and it's going to start accelerating as we go along the timeline.
So just briefly, Vic, do you think 2021 has been a year of open banking, or would you say it'll be 2022?
I think it's been a really good year for kind of setting the foundations, because I think 2020 proved that actually digital transformation can happen, and it can happen a lot more quickly than CEOs and CIOs and institutions previously thought possible. So we know that it can happen, and it can happen at pace. I think the foundation's now firmly set. I think there are still technology challenges within lots of institutions as they're beginning to move and change to a more product and agile mindset. But I think they're ready to do it now. And I think 22 will be a barnstorm of a year for open banking. But I think 21 has firmly set the foundations in place.
Vic, many thanks. Chris, final word from you. Do you see 2022 as a barnstorming year ahead?
Definitely. I mean, I think so. It feels like there's quite a lot to do to really realise that full potential. So there's it feels like these products are coming to market. They're solving real world problems, but we've got quite a bit to do actually to make it all work. So that is making sure that technology works. The interbank architecture really supports open banking, and things like the governance of the rules in the UK and the regulatory framework that sits around it as well. So it feels like there's quite a bit to do to make sure we really realise that potential, and some of those things will take a little bit longer. But I completely agree with Vic that it feels like it's on an upward trajectory. So I don't think we've hit the peak yet. We've got a long way to go.
Okay, Chris and Vic, many thanks for your input. It's been really fascinating. And I want to bring in Emily. Emily, what's your key takeaway here? Do you share that optimism about this upward trajectory?
I do. I think we are very quick to assume that consumers are slow to pick things up. And in some instances they are, and it's an educational piece, as Vic pointed out. But also, I think we need to remember how long it took people to get their head around using contactless cards. It took a long time. There were lots of competitions. There were lots of incentives from schemes, card manufacturers, anybody within that ecosystem. And I think similarly, once there is a very strong use case for the consumer to want to do it, it's going to make my life easier, quicker, it's going to benefit me in some way, shape or form, I'm going to learn how to do it pretty quickly. And I completely agree with what Vic said. The younger generation, not a problem at all. They're used to giving access to personal data. They will hand out their Facebook credentials at the drop of a hat. But the older generation, I think there's an uphill struggle.
There's a lot of confusion to cut through, do you think?
And also access to something simple like a laptop to do it, to set it up, to have someone. I mean, my 84-year-old Auntie Sheila, she's very good on an iPhone. Would she allow access to her bank account for data or to make direct payments? I'm not convinced that she would.
No, Auntie Val, my Auntie Val would be exactly the same. So thank you so much, Emily, for all your inputs. Thank you, Vic, and also thanks very much to Chris. It's been really fascinating. Now, next up, we have Claus Bunkenborg, who's the Chief Executive Officer of MobilePay. That will be a really fascinating discussion because we're going to get his views on the expanding field of digital wallets. And if you want to know what the innovations are in this space, keep watching and stay with us. Hello and welcome back to the MoneyLIVE Autumn Festival, and we're going to be speaking in this session about digital wallets, USPs and value-added services, which are all on the horizon. And I'm really delighted to say with me to discuss all of this is Claus Bunkenborg from MobilePay, who joins us, I think, on the line. We can just about see him now. Hello there, Claus. Great to have you with us at MoneyLIVE. And you're speaking to us from Denmark. So just tell me a little bit more about exactly what MobilePay does and how excited you are about the latest technologies coming forward.
Yeah. So MobilePay was founded in 2013 by Danske Bank, the major incumbent bank in Denmark. Launched a P2P service, grew almost exponentially. Today we have 4.3 million users in Denmark. That's 95% of the adult population. MobilePay is accepted by more than 200,000 merchants. So over the years we have added a number of P2B services. So you can pay with MobilePay online, in stores, pay your bills and so forth. We've also launched in Finland, where we have 1.8 million users. And just before summer, we announced a merger with our cousins in Norway, Vipps, and also a competitor, Pivo, in Finland. So we've been on a fantastic ride over the last 8 years, and using mobile technology to bring simplicity to payments. That's basically what we do.
Now, we have this expression, cash is king, but do you in fact think that cash has lost its crown and that in fact, perhaps, the end is nigh for cash?
Yes and no. Yes, if you look at the Nordic countries, definitely, it's less than 10% of all retail payments are made with cash now, and that development has been largely driven by contactless card payments, and now, of course, most lately the pandemic, which has driven more and more users to pay with cards or paying shopping online. When I say no, it's because even though we have historically low volumes of cash payments in retail, there's never been so much cash floating around in the Nordic countries. So all the digital transformation has also driven a lot of transactions into a black market where cash is used only sort of circulating outside the system. So cash is still here, but in retail, traditional retail, it's mostly gone. And I think we will see that development more or less all over Europe and all over the world.
Yeah, so as cash is disappearing from the retail side of things, do you think wallets are taking its place? To what extent do you think digital wallets will be the next product of choice?
I think it largely already is. So what we've seen here is that a lot of card transactions have now moved to the wallets. It's not maybe so much directly from cash to wallets, but it's the card transactions that are moving to the wallets. And certainly for the younger segments, the wallets are the product of choice. We see certain stores in, for instance, the Copenhagen area, traditional supermarkets and so on, where 40% of all transactions are now made with either MobilePay, Apple Pay, Google Pay, or similar wallets. So I think we can say that transition has already been made here.
But what do you think is going to drive further adoption amongst the older generation as well?
Yes, for us, as in any other retail business, it's convenience. Convenience is king. So, and where we have been most successful is where we have really managed to solve the pain point for our users. So, for instance, I don't carry cash anymore. I have to do a P2P payment. We have made it so much more easy to do a P2P payment with our wallet. But also for online shopping, we are involved in more or less half of all Danish e-commerce right now, because we have made it much more easy for the consumer to enter the payment details. You don't have to enter your card details. You can just enter your phone number, swipe in the app, and then you're done. Consumers love that, and online merchants love that because they get much more higher conversion rates. So convenience is king. Wherever we can deliver convenience, that's where the wallets can make a difference, and that's where we see the wallets are taking off.
This landscape, though, is becoming increasingly competitive. So how can digital wallets differentiate themselves?
Yeah, it's a very good question because it's such a crowded space, and I mean, of course, you need to deliver on the basic simplicity. You really need to solve that pain point. There's also an aspect of universal acceptance, or I don't know what the right term is, but if you put off limitations, some of the wallets that have failed were because they were only for the customers of one bank. They could only be used if you had a certain card and so on. It could only be used in certain shops. Where we have seen this big transition in the Nordics is because the solutions we've managed to bring out have been accepted everywhere. They've been built upfront for users of all banks, all citizens, basically. So in order to be able to compete, you need to have a very, very high level of acceptance across stores and so on, banks and so on. And then there's a question of adding relevant value-added services. If you look at Klarna as a good example right now, where they're really succeeding in offering buy now, pay later, it's not so much about offering the credit, it's about offering the convenience of payment on online shopping, where you may order 3 shirts, you only want one, you return 2 of them, and you only pay when you have selected which one you want to have. So for me, the battle in the future will be on who can best offer a more, you could say, wider range of convenience, not only for the payment itself, but for all the aspects around shopping, shipping, returning goods, and so forth.
Have you got any other success stories about companies that really have coped with this differentiation very well?
Apple Pay, I guess, is a good example. I think they are very successful here, at least, because they have really managed to make it so simple to pay that you don't have to think so much about it. They have removed all the friction. Again, Klarna is a good example, and you see these players that really manage to remove the friction and make it so simple that you sort of remove the need to actually think about what method of payment am I actually selecting. I by default select this one because it is so frictionless that I don't have to make a conscious choice about it, and that's really where companies in this space manage to succeed, and those who make it complex don't succeed.
And what kind of value-added products do you think digital wallets will add in the future, particularly in the Nordic region?
Yeah, so right now it's all about buy now, pay later. That's every day we see new players entering the market here, and as we move forward, it's service. A lot of these value-added services will be related to online shopping. How can I easily get the goods shipped and return them and so on? But we also now see that payment solutions like ours, which have such a broad acceptance in the population, become platforms, right? I have 95% of the adult population of Denmark on my platform, and although there are certain regulatory limitations, I now am attractive to a lot of merchants that want to use us not only as a payment platform, but as a marketing channel, as a marketplace to sell goods, and that's another area we will be looking into, and how we can utilize that in the future without jeopardizing the uniqueness we have right now on making payments itself simple. But when we now start to have almost all the population on one platform, that opens a lot of opportunities of new services we can bring in. So one example is that we've recently launched a virtual gift card. So we're becoming a platform for third-party gift cards, vouchers, but you can imagine any kind of digital product that we can sell on our on our platform to our users.
What about multi-currency needs and also cross-border payments? How would you say that they are also shaping the evolution of digital wallets?
I wouldn't say that they are shaping the evolution right now. I think everybody's struggling to solve cross-border payments in the simple enough fashion. We are part of a European organization where we have gathered all the European wallets, and we're trying to build interoperability. But it's turned out to be a bit of a legal nightmare to just, in a short time, create interoperability. I see a number of global players that obviously do this now, and they're like more remittance type of services. And I would say it's definitely a pain point that needs to be solved, but where nobody right now have found the right way to do it. So I think right now, I don't see it shaping the development, but I think that whoever managed to do that successfully will have a very strong position in the future.
Yeah, and do you feel the same as well with the evolution of non-fiat currencies? And do you think digital wallets will expand to hold them as well? And is there any kind of time frame that you're working towards?
Yeah, so it's not something we are looking into right now. Of course, we are following the development. I think that there are a couple of issues related to that. One is that most of the people who are interested in those types of currencies are doing it right now for investment purposes and not in order to be able to pay goods. And then there's obviously a very big regulatory concern around these type of services. And I think we won't see it in terms of the timeline you're asking for. I don't think we will see any sort of major development there until the regulatory framework has matured a bit more. And at least for a company like mine, who's owned by a bank, there's no appetite to take on a lot of risk in that area unless there's full regulatory support. So it's one of the things that are on the horizon, but I think it's not mature enough for something to become mainstream for wallets like us.
And looking at the banking perspective, as far as banks are concerned, how do you think more banks can get a foothold in this market?
I think the key word here is collaboration. If you look at which wallets have been successful across Europe, it's those where banks have been able to collaborate and build a joint solution, because a lot of the growth in this area, building up user bases and trust in these type of solutions, has been driven by P2P offerings. And it's sort of a market where a winner takes it all. There's a bandwagon effect, or whatever you want to call it. I don't want to have 10 different P2P apps on my phone. I only want to use one service. And that you can only achieve by having banks collaborating. And in the Nordics, there's been a long tradition for doing that over the last 20, 30 years. So we sort of built on that, but I see many initiatives across Europe that are failing because it's only a few banks. It's only one bank that offers the service, and it's not widely available for all users. A bit like Barclays Ping It was launched early on in the UK and didn't get enough traction because it was too limited in its reach. So for me, the key word here is collaboration between banks.
Really wise words. Thank you very much, Claus Bunkenborg, for talking to us from Denmark. It's been fascinating to have you here at MoneyLIVE. So thanks. It's all we have time for right now, because we have a panel discussion coming up, of course, when we're going to be looking so much more into the new payments architecture, what it means for infrastructure and payments going forward. So do still stay with us. Lots more to come, and we'll be hearing as well from Emily as well. everybody, and welcome back. We're just about to start the final part of this morning's session and the panel debate that we're just about to hold, which is about new payments architectures, future-proofing payments for years to come. And I'm really delighted to say we have a panel of experts to talk about this subject. Now, don't forget, we do have audience questions. We have time for those at the end of our panel discussion. We'll also be hearing from Emily again, of course. And do make sure that you file those questions via the Q&A tab on the app, and then I'll get them directly through onto my tablet and I can put them to the panel. But let me introduce the panel to start off with. First of all, we have Kate Frankish. Kate, please introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Kate Frankish from Pay.uk, and I'm the Chief Business Development Officer. As Matthew touched on earlier, we run the interbank payment platforms today, and we're responsible for developing the new payments architecture in conjunction with our customers and regulators.
So much to talk about. Thanks very much. And next up, next to Kate, we have Paul Horlock. Paul, tell us what you do.
Hi, yeah, I'm Paul. I'm the Chief Payments Officer at Santander. I joined Santander this year, so every day is still a school day at the moment, I have to say. My previous job was actually at Pay.uk. I was CEO of Pay.uk for three years, but I think I was described as an industry veteran when I took that job, so I'll leave it there, because most people know most of my background.
Okay, next up, Adrian. Adrian, please introduce yourself and tell us what you do at NatWest.
Hi, everyone. So at NatWest, I've been here a few decades, and I currently head up payment innovation and partnerships, but I also look after the UK retail payment schemes and the relationship with Pay.uk. So I cover off BACS, faster payments, clearing. I also cover off open banking and payment initiation service as well.
Lovely. Now, next to Adrian Smyth, we have Mark Davies. Mark, tell us who you represent and what you do.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Mark Davies. I work for Bottomline Technologies as an account director in the bank channel space. Payment software company working with banks and corporates around payments. Prior to joining Bottomline last year, I've spent, decades is definitely the right term, working for a number of different banks, UK, US, European, principally in product management in the payments and cash management space.
Okay, lovely. Thanks very much, Mark. And we also, I'm pleased to say, have Kate Fitzgerald from the Payment System Regulator. Kate, tell us what you do at the PSR.
So I'm a senior advisor at the PSR, and I advise on payment systems. I've spent 25 years in the industry putting together and taking apart payment systems through divestments and through mergers. So I've done a significant amount of infrastructure change. So I now advise the PSR, and we regulate the payment systems in the UK. So you heard from Chris earlier.
Lovely, thank you very much. So as we know, there is a huge amount of change on the horizon for the payments architectures, from ISO 2022 to digital currencies, of course, new payments architecture and European payments initiative. So much to talk about and break down. But I want to ask you, Kate Frankish, to start off with. Tell us a little bit more about ISO 2022 in a bit more detail and what impact you think it's going to have on the interoperability of payment systems.
Yeah, so I think people overcomplicate things like payment standards. Fundamentally, it's just a way of having data in a format that one person who's paying and the person on the receiving end can actually read that payment and use the data for different things. The difference on ISO 222 to what's used today in faster payments, which is called 8583 if anyone's a geek, is that it carries much more data. And much more data means that if our customers at one end and the other end of the payments chain develop their systems to be able to read that data to do different things, they can provide new and exciting payment propositions to their customers. So an example could be, for a small business, the ability to reconcile payments straight through processing, not having to have operational people actually looking at and matching up payments on their particular system. So there's lots of different uses of ISO. I think probably we're scratching the surface on what it could do for the industry. But all of our customers, our banks, fintechs, etc., who use our payments platforms today are already developing that capability for other payments, for cross-border payments, for example. So there's a global change to that standard. And that will mean that payments that flow from other countries into the UK, which happens today, we have the last leg of a payment journey on faster payments. There'll be much more data. We will know that they've come from abroad, and the banks who receive those payments will have the necessary data to do more with that information.
So Mark, can you expand, for example, on what Kate's saying in terms of how you believe there could be greater strategic benefits from all of this?
Sure. There are many, I think. I'd pick upon three, one of which I think Kate's briefly mentioned, which is significant improvements in efficiency, the structured data allowing for greater STP, improved reconciliation, more automation of that payments process, big benefits to be gained there. Portability, I think, is a key one. The fact that ISO 20022, the standard, is being rolled out through so many international and domestic payment systems and therefore adopted by so many banks in their underlying payment systems and channels means that it's much easier for customers, corporate customers, small business customers, personal customers to move from bank to other bank and without some of the complication that might have implied in a world where multiple standards persist. And then the final one, which I don't think is often talked about but is mentioned, is liquidity. Improved STP coupled with a plethora of real-time payment systems means improved cash flow visibility, improved cash flow reporting, making the treasurer's life easier and giving them a greater ability to manage liquidity more tightly and even ultimately getting to a kind of nirvana of real-time liquidity management.
It's a whole array of benefits.
Absolutely, yeah.
And looking on the wider global scale, there are a huge amount of payments initiatives taking place right now, but I want to dig deeper into the UK's new payments architecture. Kate, what do you think this architecture will bring about in terms of the impact, not just actually here in the UK, but beyond? Yeah,
so like any platform, and Matthew touched on in his speech, faster payments has been around for 13 years. And like any technology, we do run really robust systems, but technology changes, and we need to change and modernize our payments platform. So the real thought behind the new payments architecture, which was an industry initiative to look at what would be better, there are a few key things I would call out that we're looking to deliver. One is better and easier access. So different access routes for people who want to do things like access our platform through API connectivity, modernizing the way that people can actually set up and become a direct customer of ours compared to what we do today. We've touched on ISO, obviously that has an awful lot of benefits there. And the other thing we want to do is really drive the benefit of the data and everything that we capture on our platform should actually really give benefit to end users, customers and businesses that use the services, and also to what we call customers, the people who actually directly connect to our platform. So how do we use that data in a way that gives something back and enables us to do things like better fraud prevention?
So Paul, what do you see as the real potential for NPA in your eyes? What kind of benefits can it bring?
Well, I was going to say it's all about the data, but I think we've already started to go down that route. But having gone back into a commercial bank, I think the big challenge that we have is investment on systems for the future. And right now we have to invest in separate gateways, in separate operating systems. We have to run different capabilities for our low-value domestic capability. We run different activities for international. The move to ISO 20022 allows us to really center on a common messaging standard and start to move to common infrastructure and really slim down our gateway capability. So we can plan forward much better now about where we're going to go for the investment and the architecture that we're going to build for the future. And that's a massive improvement in the conversation we have then with our internal stakeholders around what we're going to need from the business to support their business moving forward. And one of the big business cases we are building on internally is the opportunity this releases us to really invest in channels and in delivery to consumers. We spend a lot of money on running rails, and if you run 3 or 4 of them, it becomes a real overhead and a real drag on the business. If we get down to 1 and we start to get real benefit from the data, the chance we have then to really engage customers with new overlay services and new opportunities starts to really improve and excite the business about the things we can do with payments.
And Adrian, we've heard from Kate and Paul specifically about how it's aimed at driving innovation, MPA. What kind of benefits can the whole spectrum of players get from this?
So if I start off with our retail consumers and merchants, if we think about the instant payment capabilities that MPA will deliver, and we touched on the previous open banking panel as well, discussion as well. The enhancements to the open banking journey is where there is a certain level of delay in terms of the actual payment going through. It's kind of near real time, not instant. Those enhancements that instant payments brings a lot more safety and security around the payment journey. That then creates that competition between sort of card payments and account-to-account payments. That competition drives innovation, as we heard earlier as well. Then I think if you go into the more kind of corporate customers and business customers, and Paul touched on it, simplify channels, create the overlays, really be very clear about the opportunity for your customers as well. So what are the benefits it brings to them to get them on board with it? From a top-end financial institution to large corporate, they've got some big change agendas to get through as well. So you've got to be able to describe the benefits to them. And that's very much in the efficiency. It's very much in the kind of security, fraud prevention. We looked at QR code payments. If you can take a QR code with an account detail, pass that through to the payment with a biometric authentication token, pass that all the way through, you're starting to create different journeys with different levels of and much enhanced levels of security.
So much innovation taking place in this space. Well, let me bring in Kate Fitzgerald from the Regulator, because we can't talk about this without the regulator's perspective. What do you see as the outcomes of the MPA?
So, I mean, clearly the guys have talked about huge benefits and data and new technology and great new use cases which give great outcomes for consumers. But I think there's an opportunity that we see, which is competition at that structural level. So we see the opportunity for the MPA to compete for retail transactions, and in doing that, not just compete for the sake of competition, but in doing that, bring down the cost of payment acceptance in the UK, which which is high and which we think needs to be tackled. So we're very interested in all the functionality that we've all been talking about this morning, but we think there are more things that the MPA needs to bring, and they have already been touched on this morning. But a set of rules that help us to ensure that customers are protected in the right way for the right types of payment. And making sure that liability for fraud is clear, so that we're all incentivized to keep fraudsters out of the system. And also, as well, a pricing model that actually works, so a commercial model that incentivizes and aligns people to be able to use the MPA for retail transactions.
Yeah, okay, so the payment and protection of customers is absolutely vital. And I want to drill down a little bit more now into the implementation of the new payments architecture. And Kate, there have been some concerns about the potential risks involved, haven't there? What's your perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, these are critical national infrastructure. There are always risks when you're deploying payment systems. So we don't take on the work lightly. But since the PSF agreed, the basic premise of the MPA, we did find last year that it wasn't making quite as much progress, despite still having industry support. There were clearly some difficulties, and one of those difficulties was the complexity of the scope, and actually looking at that, we were mindful that A broad scope makes a project very difficult to deliver, very difficult to design. And another difficulty was that there were very different views about whether a competitive procurement for that central infrastructure was necessary or not. And a competitive procurement puts a lot of demands on an organisation to be able to design and make good decisions about what is needed for that solution. But not having a competitive procurement does bring risks in terms of ability to compete and innovate. So we consulted on that. We got a good range of responses from 50 organisations, and we have now set out a way forward which we think will help to mitigate some of those risks of delivery. So narrowing the scope so that it is phased. So in the initial part, the Pay.UK will be looking to procure an infrastructure just for single immediate payments, and making the procurement competitive and maintaining all of the benefits from a competition perspective that brings.
Okay, thanks very much, Kate. And I'd like to bring in Mark. Mark, how do you think banks should be preparing for this architectural change?
I hope they already are, which I'm pretty sure they are. There's an obvious level of required engagement with the various industry bodies, Pay.UK, the PSR, UK Finance, and there's a wealth of information to be had there. There is also benefit to be gained from working with vendors. They have a vested interest in making sure NPA works for them and can provide guidance and insight. But I think internally an important point is to make sure that NPA is a whole bank effort. It cannot just be seen to be a IT project. It is an absolutely massive IT project, but it needs to be seen as much more than that. Involve product, involve customer-facing teams, fraud, risk, operations. It touches every part of the organisation. Getting that breadth of buy-in and understanding across the whole organisation will eventually lead to a much more satisfactory and beneficial outcome. And also ensure that you have the appropriate level of exec support, because you'll need exec support to get the right level of financial and human resource dedicated to this huge initiative.
And as we've been already hearing today, Kate, Pay.UK is supporting the industry through this transition, but how ready would you say institutions are?
It's tricky, and in previous roles I've been working in a bank actually delivering change, so I know how difficult it is, one, to get the funding and how far ahead you've got to get the funding before you can actually do the IT change, and two, to actually get the whole organisation, as you touched on, behind it so that everything works seamlessly. But what we've been doing, certainly particularly focused over the last 12 months, is working really closely with all of our existing customers for them to help us and us to help them understand the design. So we've got a fully completed design document which is significantly detailed and is now out with all of our customers to review and impact assess over the next few months. But we didn't do that on our own. We did it in collaboration with our customers, because fundamentally, in the end of the day, what we want to deliver is something that works for all. And there are times where we have to take quite a difficult position, because we're looking at what is the best for the industry as a whole rather than what is the commercial best for a particular customer, bank, whatever. But I think the last 12 months has been great, and people have really leaned in and got involved, which is what we needed. There's lots to do still, and thinking about doing a massive test program, making sure everybody's ready to go, hand-holding all of our existing customers and any new customers who want to come onto the NPA will be a significant amount of work. But that's the next phase. We've done a lot this year. We're in a really good position to move forward with our vendor selection early next year, and then move forward from there.
So there is real progress going on right now. But Paul, let's talk about the SME landscape, because how do we ensure that all players can really benefit from this architectural change and all of these opportunities, and that SMEs and merchants aren't left behind?
I mean, it's interesting. There's two things that Kate said this morning that are crucial from an SME perspective. One is standards, because I agree, it's a simple thing. It's a message from A to B. But when you're invested in old standards and you're a small institution who has very elongated refresh rates to move your technology to new standards is a big deal. And we saw that when you look at the changes to point-of-sale technology in the UK to really take up the opportunity of contactless. You think about the SMEs invested in backstell IT technology, invested in old message standards. It takes a long time to move. And you also talked about funding. It's really important to find the funding. It's really important to retain the funding. Because if we don't get timing right, often people will get reservations in their budgets. If we don't then deliver according to what we expected, that money disappears. And trying to get that back and get the support back to get moving again is really, really difficult. And I know personally, the MPA has been a complicated journey, right from the strategy forum right through to understanding what the shape of it is. I think we've always thought faster payments would go first. The clarity now is really helping so that we can understand what those investment cycles look like, and we can engage them with businesses and SMEs and corporates to understand what they can do to get benefit from the message changes and how they need to start to refresh their capabilities and what products they can bring to market. Because what we can't just ask them to do is spend money. We've got to start talking about the benefits they're going to bring to their businesses. And one of the big benefits that Kate mentioned was in the SMF documents was all about reconciliation. I think we saw that the UK economy could benefit to the tune of about £7 billion of efficiency improvements around the data opportunities around reconciliation. We've got to make that real for SMEs. We've got to be able to explain to them and work with them to see where they get those benefits, because that's where they're going to get the investment opportunities to start taking up the new technology opportunities that are out there.
Yeah, potential is huge, just grasping it. Okay, Adrian, I want to look with you at just the broader picture. We've talked about ISO 2022, MPA, but also we have digital IDs as well. What do you think the whole end game is here for future payments?
So I think this is something we are looking at very seriously at the moment. Is we in a bank, I just want to touch on what Mark said as well around getting the whole bank bought into NPA. We've had to do that with ISO the last few years around real-time gross settlement and cross-border payments. That really, we need to continue that message, that narrative, build into MPA, not just provide another acronym out to our customers as well, but choose it as an ISO journey. But then you've got confirmation of payee, you've got digital identity, you've got request to pay, you've got all these things that could be seen separately, but we feel they need to be seen together. And part of that is, what does it mean for security and for prevention when you start to bring these elements together? How does request to pay work with open banking payments? How does it work with potential different payment options as well? How does it work with, in the future work where we get maybe more of a gig economy? What opportunities are there around income smoothing and, trying to sort of help customers through, those more difficult moments through the month, etc. So it comes with a huge amount of opportunity to do lots of different propositional changes for your customers. The digital identity part is, and we'll touch on the previous speaker as well, is around, I think, collaboration at the industry level. I think in the UK, we've been historically bad at doing that as a group of institutions and firms. We've got into compete very quickly. So I think if we can collaborate at the right level and at the right layer, create the enablers, I think we then have an opportunity to get digital identity out quickly, do the fraud prevention data work that the industry is looking at now, and then build a path to MPA that starts protecting customers now, starts to deliver some of the benefits now, and then leads, so you've got a great narrative for customers when the big changes come. Especially with our larger corporate customers, they have very, very full work stacks. And just because we talk nicely to them doesn't mean we get into their work stack at the right time.
So building on what Adrian's saying, Kate Frankish, what kind of innovations do you see could actually bring all these different elements together?
Yeah, I think probably one to touch on is the retail shopping journey, either online or kind of in store going forward. And we've talked about the NPA will deliver an instant payment, which today is near real time, but NPA will be instant within 5 seconds, like a card payment at point of sale. And an overlay provider, that might be a different third party, will provide a message to the merchant in real time that the payment has reached their account and that they can allow the goods to be released and taken. And things like the digital ID, fraud prevention, etc., will protect the actual payment that the customer is making. So there's lots of new ways of looking at interbank payments, which are enhancements to what we have today. It's not completely new, but they make the journey better. They make the propositions work better for consumers. And Kate touched on the fact that the UK economy spends an awful lot of money on card payment fees, and it's not just banks earn interchange, but there's lots of layers of fees that go on behind the scenes. And we've done a relatively crude calculation, but at the moment, our faster payments traffic takes up about 3% of the customer to business type payments, which we would consider kind of open banking, retail type payments. If we move the dial to 10%, we could take £1 billion out of cost to the UK economy. So it's not small amounts of money that could really change. And that is beneficial to end users, our customers, the banks and fintechs, and everybody in the whole payments ecosystem.
Kate mentioned Kate, so let me bring you in. Over here from the regulatory perspective, what's your perspective in terms of this bigger picture?
Yeah, I think what Kate just said is actually really important. So our goal is to unlock that potential for open banking and interbank to really create rivalry and diversity and really be able to address more of those use cases in terms of transactions. I just want to build a little bit on some of the numbers that Kate's already given you, but our card acquiring market review, after the financial analysis we did on that, showed us that between 2014 2018, the cost of card acceptance doubled. So card fees are going up, quite significantly. I was really interested to read today in the press that Amazon have said that the cost of accepting Visa credit cards is an obstacle for businesses in trying to keep prices down for customers. So we see that as a really important thing to bring rivalry and diversity into retail purchase transactions.
Okay, well, I can see Mark nodding there. So Mark, what other kinds of new technologies or payment systems do you see could really be shaking up the industry?
Sure. There's an interesting sort of timely one referencing recent news, open banking variable recurring payments, which were in the news this week. There's a slight delay to the implementation, but their initial focus of the mandate is around something called sweeping, me-to-me payments, which have sort of fairly clear benefits around improving savings or reducing overdraft costs, that kind of thing. But then VRP acts as a platform that can do so much more and potentially get into the space of card payments. You can see a world where rather than having your card on file with your Uber or Lyft or whatever, you set up a VRP mandate and then that no longer incurs the cost of the card and relies upon a mandate controlled, and I think that's really important, controlled by the payment service user, the customer. They set the parameters around that VRP type payment. And ultimately, I think the traditional, if you want to call it that, form of BACS direct debit is here for a long time to come. It's well established, it works very well, it processes huge volume without trouble. But VRP opens a potential different way of achieving some of those same goals. And I think generationally, I think you will see a generation grow up that is used to having greater control, used to controlling all of their banking from their mobile phone because that's all they've ever done. And that kind of new service, I think, is really interesting for how things play out going forward.
Now, another element that we've had a lot of recently about is central bank digital currencies. So Paul, what do you see as the potential here for such currencies?
I think as a lead in, I just want to talk about payments as beset by the law of unintended consequences. And if you look over the years, we often have a great intention and end up causing another problem. And I think it's really exciting we can look at £1 billion cost, but that cost is also a revenue. So we have to be really careful that we understand the impact of the costs along the chain that help protect customers as much as take revenue or costs into other businesses. And one of the things that the PSR has been particularly vocal about, and we were at Pay.UK when I was there, was about customer protection in bank-to-bank payments. And I think digital currencies and central bank digital currencies has a similar potential for unintended consequences. The nature of commercial banking in the UK is built around our high street banks, our challenger banks, our people entering the market to engage with customers. And we actually have a very good digital currency. It's sterling, right? It's been running as faster payments for 13 years. It arrives near real time, but it will be instant. And I think if we're going to move to opportunities around central currency, we have to understand what it does to support the banking system as much as abstract from the banking system. I think there's really good opportunities around settlement efficiencies and liquidity efficiencies. But if it disintermediates the services and the opportunities and the trust actually that's been built up between customers and banks, and it starts to dilute that, actually we're in danger of breaking down the benefits of our banking systems, both from a customer point of view and from a UK economy revenue perspective. So we have to be really careful, and I think I've seen that in a lot of the commentary that's around, and I've joined the UK Finance Group on this, and there's a Bank of England advisory group on this. I think everybody's trying to look at all the angles on this, because as much as you can get excited about the benefits of the velocity of payments and the simplicity of payments, actually we have to be really careful with the structures we have today, because they're there for good reasons from a risk and from an economic perspective.
So Bitcoin should just be a supporting player, not a leading role.
Well, I think there's space for so many innovations in the market, but we have to take real care with them. And I think, Pay.UK are experts from a central risk management perspective. And when you sit in a commercial bank, you see the risks every day in what you do. And innovation is fantastic, but it's got to be there for the benefit of the customer and the economy.
So Kate, from your perspective, what are the opportunities and the challenges in this respect?
So, I mean, from our perspective, the opportunity is the combination of open banking and interbank payments. And we've already touched on, the reasons for that. But it's kind of in terms of the priorities, that there are a number of things that need to work well in this space, or in these two spaces. So, we've talked about functionality, we've talked about data. We've talked quite rightly about consumer protection, having liability in the right place, having a set of rules that gives people the ability to trust the systems, and commercial models, so that we align incentives and make things work right for the good of the people and the businesses who are using the systems. But I will say that I think as we see open banking as an opportunity, we accept that there's a lot of work to do to get that properly embedded into the payment ecosystem. And we're committed to helping with that work. And we want to see OBIE transition into its VAU body with the right governance, but also with the right regulatory framework around it, to make sure that all of those outcomes are achieved for the good of the consumer and the economy.
Okay, well, thank you to all of you. We've got lots of questions that have come through, so I'll crack on. The first one that's come through: with confirmation of pay being a solution to failed payments domestically, what could be done for international cross-border payments? Kate, Frankish, do you have a view on perhaps how cross-border payments could be addressed? Or Adrian, I can see you nodding as well.
Maybe Adrian rather than me.
Yeah, so Smyth are looking at this as well in terms of confirmation of the beneficiary or beneficiary validation. So that's one we're looking at. There are a number of confirmation of payee providers that operate in the UK as well, that also operate globally. So again, there's opportunity there. If you think about what Swift have access to, is, and Kate touched on it as well from a UK perspective, a lot of data, so you can start to do those matching fundamentals quite quickly if there's that appetite to do so. So I think confirmation of payee, or a type of confirmation of payee for cross-border payments, shouldn't be too far away. The enablers are there. It's just getting the people together to get it done.
Okay, thank you. Adrian, and now another question, picking up on Mark's point that BACS direct debit will be around for many years to come. Will it risk going the same way as checks, i.e. a subscale payment system that doesn't quite disappear?
Oh gosh, that's an interesting one. I guess part of that question will end up being answered by the PSR and Pay.UK when they ultimately look to the further roadmap of the MPA and get to the sort of, I think, for the moment, slightly thorny question of what happens with BACS, where I think BACS is an interesting one in that context. Both the direct debit, huge, massive volume around utility payments and all of those good things, Bank's credits, equally huge around payroll and, you know, well established in both of those. I think it's unlikely that it will be allowed to sort of wither and die on the vine. I think if that is seen to be a possible / probable outcome, then I think action will be taken to ensure that it doesn't. Again, given the point, it's such a critical part of our national infrastructure. I don't think it will end up that way. The parallels with checks, yeah, it's an interesting one, and we could debate whether checks should still be around. There are a myriad of good reasons why they still are. I know where I would personally come down, but I recognise the demand is still there. I'm not sure it's a strict equivalence between the two, so I think it's unlikely that they'll end up in the same situation. And actually, for people who still use checks now, I'm not sure they would regard them as subpar, actually. I think they'd say they still do what I do. The clearance is slightly quicker, it's image-based, so, you know, it's evolved to meet the demand that still exists.
Kate, would you agree with Mark's?
Yeah, I mean, I would. Clearly, you know, the opportunity of VRP has the potential to help us in that kind of that space for regular billing, and we're very interested in seeing what the market can do in that space. I'm going to mention it one more time, but we do need to think about the direct debit indemnity and you know, the consumer protection that goes into the future of that payment product as well. But yes, as Mark said, the roadmap is yet to be set out, so there's plenty of decisions.
Yeah.
So another question that's come through. You've mentioned the cost of payments will be greatly reduced. What alternative business models do you envision will replace the revenue from payments for the payment facilitators? Paul, could you?
Well, yeah, and that's a great question, because we've got to find alternative revenue models. And if you look at the work that MasterCard have done with Vocalink around Pay by Bank app, that's brought a product to market where they've looked at an alternative revenue approach to bring value to the merchant and to the acquiring institution in a way that takes the cost down, but it still allows to build a customer protection model within that process. And I think the value's got to come from the value you can get from the data, the value you can develop out of the transaction, and that's why the data's so crucial. Understanding more about what customers are doing, what they want, how they want to transact, starts to create opportunities to create customers with other products and other added value capabilities, which starts to breed other value propositions in the market. So that's where I think we've got to, and we can't move from one to the other without doing that, because we'll end up with a hole in the middle. We won't be able to do what Kate's talking about in terms of protecting customers with the indemnities and the warranties that we need. But just going back to the checks and the direct debits, I think we're too close to Westminster and too much of a risk of a select committee to make any predictions about direct debits or checks or anything. Yeah, too dangerous.
Good point. Right, let's move on to Kate, because I want to ask you about this question that's come through about how the MPA has taken too long already. Will it still be the global leader we hope for when it eventually launches? What's your take on that?
We certainly think so. I know outside looking in, we have taken a long time and there's been a few false starts. We definitely understand that we need to move at pace. The significant, I suppose, progress we've made over the last 12 months, I hope to all of the people who are our customers, is showing our willingness to speed up and to lean in and make sure we can move at pace. But we've got to move at pace and be safe as well. So we have to buy something that is market leading and will give us what we want and what our customers want for their end users. And we have to do the migration onto the new platform in a safe transition way, because you know, faster payments are such a big part of the UK economy, and we cannot risk something happening, an unintended consequence. So there is that. I get the frustration, but we are moving forward at pace. We have a great design, and we feel that by the time we come to launch, that will still be market leading. Yes.
Another question come through about ISO 2022. There are significant outlays involved in this. How soon can industry expect to see a return on investment? Who would like to take that? Adrian.
I think it's a very difficult question. I think it will come down to it's got to come down to the propositions and the customers you keep with you, the propositions you develop off the back of that as an enabler, That's where you're going to drive the revenue. That's where you're going to drive the cost down. Those two come together. You've got to have a positive outcome. So it's it's not a case of just sitting back and letting it happen. We've got to go out and get it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry, no. And I think it requires it requires kind of full engagement right up front from banks and the other parties involved. The worst outcome is a kind of de minimis compliance with ISO 20022, because if we do that, because it's cheaper and somewhat easier, we run a real risk of never realising those benefits. Sorry, Paul.
Well, let's not ignore what's going on with RTGS as well, because the banks are already in this journey, because we're working with the Bank of England on moving high value to 20022. So the benefits actually are starting to merge some of the technology together, or if you get your roadmap right, are starting to appear relatively quickly, but it's a very complex journey to go through. So it's not just MPA that's in the story. You know, we've got SWIFT, we've got RTGS, we've got MPA, we've got lots of things changing at the same time.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you so much to all of you. It's been a really fascinating discussion, and I've got through quite a few of the questions, a few more to come. One was on central bank digital currencies, but I think, Paul, you did answer that really well, actually. It's really interesting to get your perspective. So Kate and Paul and Adrian and Mark, many thanks. But listening to all of this is Emily, and I really want to ask you, Emily, what your takeaway is from this whole discussion about what your vision is in terms of the challenges ahead, all of this new architecture.
That's a great question, and I don't think I've actually ever seen a panel with as much experience as we've had today. So, I mean, that was amazing. I think there's just so much change, and what was interesting for me was when Paul mentioned the fact that it's funding and getting support within the banks as well, which, to be perfectly honest, I hadn't really thought through. I assumed, naively, is that, you know, when these things change, the banks are all on board and everybody's like, yes, let's get on and deal with it. I didn't say I was naive. I also am quite pleased I don't have either of the Kate's task of picking this apart and making the right decisions for infrastructural change for consumers for the next, you know, decades to come. But what I am enthused by is people such as this, with the amount of expertise that they have at the forefront of change, because it can only lead to good things.
There's a question that's come through for you, Emily, in particular. We have contactless and instant. What else would you like to have? Chip in the finger, perhaps?
I get asked this a lot. I mean, if you think back to originally when we all started to use biometrics, nobody really knew what they were doing by biometrics. We have very good security systems around retinas, fingerprint, voice recognition, chip in a finger. We put our chips in our animals, so perhaps maybe just chips in paper. We'll see.
Thank you so much, Emily Baum, for your comments. You've been a really great co-host and partner in crime for this session, and thank you again to the panel.